individuals, at helping these individuals as the minimum wage can. Additionally, so I simply want you to extend the argument that there's massive amounts of these people in poverty and that there's a discrepancy that these people are hurt the most by the minimum wage. Specifically, that's cool. That's all I wanted. Go to Advantage 2. They say that social services are going to be able to help people as well, but we say that this is going to be insufficient. There's mass social services that exist in the United States already. They isolate, the only two things they isolate when I asked them were food stamps and daycare, both of which in some quantities also already exist for people under the poverty line. You can extend my analysis that even with the social services that exist now, there are 46.5 million people in poverty, and even though social service rates have increased over the last 30 years, my second uniqueness point says that inequality has risen steadily every single year in the last 30 years, which says that social services are insufficient to be able to help these individuals. Onto the links. This is where they're really going to lose the social services debate because they can see the analysis specifically of our 3 warrants that tell you that poverty rates will directly be decreased by the increasing of the minimum wage. They can see that the too many people who live in poverty are going to be helped out of poverty immediately. They have no explanations to why social services are going to help people out of poverty. There's only a certain amount of food you can buy, and if these individuals already have food stamps that provide all of their food for them, giving them extra food isn't going to help them in any capacity. You can send the impact that says poverty is really bad and something you should prioritize in this round. Go to the count plan. First, permutation. The United States federal government should increase the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour, and the United States federal government should provide more social services, which is permutation. We should do both the plan and the counter plan. Okay, the first argument is that permutation will shield the link to the disadvantage. Specifically, it'll shield the link to disadvantage number 1. If we're not just targeting businesses, but also increasing social services, it'll mean that they don't believe this is a target on business. This means that there's a decreased propensity for businesses to collapse because people will be able to get social services elsewhere. Also, we see the counter plan can never solve the issues with poverty. We've had ongoing social services, literally since the Great Society programs in the 1960s, and poverty rates have only been increasing. This means that it's just empirically shown that these issues cannot be solved. Also, the counter plan links to the first disadvantage because businesses are not going to like any kind of mass investment in social services. The way something like this would have to be funded would be some sort of an increased tax on either consumers or businesses. We say if it's on consumers, people will be less likely to spend in businesses, and that would lead to the same collapse they isolate. Or people would, or businesses themselves will be taxed, and that would cause the same impacts that you isolate being bad on these things. Also, you say that it's going to, the counter plan also links to disadvantage number 2 because you say this is basically a waste of money because teenagers are going to get it. But we say that there's plenty of people who are on the welfare system that simply take advantage of it already and get like $100,000 from having a bunch of kids, which probably means that people are just going to abuse this system too, and you're not going to be helping the people who need it the most. Cool. Go to the disadvantage. First, the Affordable Care Act should have tripped any kind of destruction of small businesses because it mandated a drastic increase in the amount they have to pay for health care. This means that they've already been able to deal with higher prices for things and could survive. The second argument is just empirically false that small businesses are going to collapse. They can see the example I give you out of the PMC, which is Seattle was able to raise the minimum wage to over $15 an hour, and the Seattle economy is one of the strongest ones in the entirety of the United States. We also isolate that state minimum wages have been above $10 for long periods of time. The Washington state minimum wage since 2007 has been over $9, and Washington also is one of the strongest state economies in the United States. This shows that there isn't necessarily a correlation between increasing the minimum wage and the destruction of small businesses. Also, they concede on our solvency argument that this is going to be phased in over a 2-year period. This means that small businesses will have time to react and change their business models to be able to do this. They say people are going to be laid off, which means there's going to be increased rates of poverty. But we say that the poverty rate for these individuals is so high that they do not have uniqueness for an increased rates of poverty because it's already so bad, which means this is going to be an issue. They say there's going to be an economic collapse, but we say the economy will never collapse. The first example is there's been 48 recessions in the United States since the Great Depression, none of which have collapsed the U.S. economy, which shows it's resilient. Also, there's been 2 double-dip recessions in that period, and the economy has not collapsed, which probably shows that a few small businesses shutting their doors would never lead to a collapse in the economy. Also, big businesses are the key to the economy. Small businesses have been dying off for years because they cannot compete on the scale of big businesses, which means that a few of them being collapsed into big businesses would happen inevitably. On the second disadvantage. First of all, this doesn't function as any kind of offense in the debate. If they win this, it just means that every single dollar spending isn't going to go to somebody in poverty. That's going to be irrelevant because even if there's some teenagers who work for minimum wage and would be helped, there's also a huge number of people in poverty who would be helped. You can look to our links on the Advantage 1 to tell you how many people who are in poverty are going to be directly affected by this. They said it's not going to increase minimum wage enough to get people out of poverty, but again, we already answered this on the Advantage. They say that this would take money from social services, but this just isn't the case. This would require something from businesses, not any spending from the government, which means all of the social services that already exist would continue to be in place and could help these individuals.
Okay, here, okay. So this is 2 minutes.
Hi, so the roadmap for this speech is I'm going to first address Advantage 2, number 2, and then I will address the opponent's rebuttal on our disadvantage number 2 and a misunderstanding on the counter plan. So first of all, our opponent has stated that from 2012 to 2015, 12% poverty rates in America have increased from 12% to 15%. But the thing is, minimum wage has been steadily increasing during that times. And if minimum wage, while they're increasing, suddenly poverty has increased too, doesn't that mean that increasing minimum wage also increases poverty? And that point is contradictory to them and does not reduce poverty. And also, now moving on to disadvantage number 2. So our opponent has stated that food stamps and daycare is insufficient, but currently it's not. According to the status quo, it's not enough. And right now, if we allocate money to give out these and implement these social services, it will give people in poverty below the poverty line more food. And regarding regarding disadvantage number 2, he says that people who are teens. People who are not teens will have. He says that people who are teens will not get the. People who are teens. There are still people who the minorities who are working the jobs, but we say that people who are teens will get the money. However, the Bureau of Labor Services has evidence that extends this. And he also says that small businesses will collapse, and that's not a big deal because there are large businesses to support the economy. But since small businesses will collapse, then that'll create less jobs and more poverty, since the people who have created that businesses will not have jobs, and their employees will be their employees will also be jobless and in poverty, which also is contradictory to his second advantage, which says that it will reduce poverty. And just a simple calculation of the $3 increase in minimum wage. So if a small company has 30 employees and they each work 8 hours a day, 5 days every week, then each day they're losing $90, and each week they're losing $450, and each month they're losing $1,890. And this amount of money adds up quickly throughout the year, and just shows you how much of a detriment increasing this minimum wage to $10 is. And thank you, and please support the negation.
Okay. So just for framework for this final voter speech, I'm going to first start off by giving a voter a reason that we should win this debate. Next, I'm going to go to just talking about some points that have been kind of going on in this debate that still need to be resolved. And then finally, I'm going to give a glimpse into the world, what it would look like from the affirmations versus negations perspective. So first, our first voter being that of net benefits. So our case has clearly proven that it has more net benefits than the negations case. While the negations case is saying that an increase in minimum wage is going to help lessen discrimination because of the fact that there's so much discrimination in the workplace when it comes to minority groups of color or women, for example. However, we would like to state that it is simply a raise, a simple raise of a few dollars, while in some states, may be a quite significant increase. For many states, is not that much of an increase. So because of this, it's going to actually make it so that people of a lower socioeconomic class are still, no matter what, not going to be able to live on $10 an hour. So increasing it even this much is not going to be, this is not a living wage. So this actually doesn't have these kind of merits of getting people out of poverty. It's not going to increase poverty, or it's not going to decrease poverty. And also, it is going to significantly, even though this isn't much for the individual person, this is going to have a huge toll and a huge tax on our economy, because we simply cannot provide this type of money in our economy. Similarly, their reputation about the social services still not being enough, or people being mistrustful of the government. I would like to say to this that people can be mistrustful of the government all they want. The government is essentially because of this plan cannot discriminate against people of color, but rather would provide social services in greater amounts, which currently the social services we currently have are not enough to get people out of poverty. But if we reallocate these funds, as we said in our counter plan we would do, into these social service programs, this is going to actually help people get their basic needs met so that they can kind of climb up this rung and reach higher social mobility. So now we are going to go to an AFNEG world, or what's the world going to look like if the affirmations resolution is passed versus the negation. So in the affirmation world, what you have is essentially an economy that's collapsing. It's actually being crushed under its own weight of the economic strain of this. There's going to be more poverty. There's going to be money that is not going to the right people, and so as a result, the poorest people with lowest skill levels are not going to be benefiting from the result of this, and because this money is not going to the people who need it, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics evidence that we mentioned in our first speech. Additionally, in the negations world, there's going to be less poverty, as these social services are going to help get people their basic human rights that they deserve, and the money is going to go directly to those who need it, and so we don't have to worry about the money going to teenagers who are going to spend it on video games and candy. So something we would additionally like to do is just to weigh some impacts. So the impacts essentially here are a worse economy in the affirmations world versus people reaching higher levels of social mobility, better quality of life in the negations world. And so for all these reasons and more, I strongly urge you to vote in favor of the negation of this resolution. Thank you.
Cool. Nice job.
Oh, do you need to do it?
I'm not going to do it. It's okay.
Okay.
Or if